Dairit with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, and welcome to our webinar on vapor intrusion. Okay. I guess this is not working. Oops. What happened? Yep. Before we go through with introductions, please download the glossary and presentation on the panel to your right. You will be able to ask questions in that console, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions later. After the workshop, we will have a survey that we'll be sending out. So please respond to that survey. It helps us improve our webinars. The Center for Creative Land Recycling is a national nonprofit dedicated to land reuse. We conduct webinars and workshops to educate stakeholders involved in land reuse. CCLR is also a technical assistance to Brownfield's grantee under the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Brownfields program. Under this grant, CCLR covers EPA regions 2, 9, and 10. Our TAB partners are the New Jersey Institute of Technology, which covers EPA regions 1, 3, and 4, and Kansas State University, which covers regions 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we have a few polling questions. So please respond to the polling question, and the results will be tallied and shown shortly. I think we're okay. Let's see the results. We have 33 from state or local government, 7 from the federal government, 7 nonprofit, and 43 from the private sector, and 10 other. The next poll question is, how long have you been in the land reuse field? Quite a few newer professionals here. Go ahead, Sherry. So most of you have under 10 years of experience, and that's why we get people like our speakers to help out with those issues. And lastly, and the last polling question, which TAB region are you in? And if you're not sure, it's okay to say you don't know. So it appears that most of you do not know which TAB region you are in. So we will, the survey will give you an idea of where you're in. Again, CCLR covers regions 2, 9, and 10, which are New York, New Jersey, and the West Coast. New Jersey Institute of Technology covers regions 1, 3, and 4, which are the New England area, Mid-Atlantic, and Southeast. And Kansas State University covers the Midwest. Next. Oh. And CCLR will have other webinars like this coming up very shortly. We have, in June 14th, we'll have environmental risky business, negotiating environmental risk. and then on the June 21st is developer math. Please visit our website to sign on. Oops. So today's presenters are with RPS Iris. David Grunat and Greg Noblet are both professionals who have had many years of experience in vapor intrusion assessment and remediation. They are with RPS Iris, which CCLR has worked with for many years, educating Brownfield redevelopers. And they work on many sectors, which David will get into when he gets into his presentation. So with that, I'm going to transfer control over to David.
All right, thank you, Ignacio. So the title of my presentation today, or mine and Greg's presentation, is In the Air Tonight. As some of you may know, Phil Collins wrote the song In the Air Tonight. It was a big hit for a while, but there was a lot of controversy over what that song was about. So after I thought about it a little bit, I started to think that his song was about vapor intrusion. So I thought it was a great way to start our presentation. So just a little bit more about Iris Environmental, which is now RPS Group. We are an international engineering and consulting company out here on the West Coast with Greg and I. We are working mostly in the environmental world. So we do full environmental services, including due diligence, phase 1, phase 2, transactional assistance. We're experts in site remediation and investigation, so everything from finding your issues to cleaning them up. And finally, we also have a big specialty in health risk assessment, including multi-path quantitative risk assessment, vapor intrusion modeling, and ambient and indoor air modeling. So our hope for the presentation today is to go through what is vapor intrusion, when would you expect to have vapor intrusion issues, how do you check for it, and then if you do have a problem, how do you deal with it? And at the end, we'll also have a couple of miscellaneous topics.
Right, and we have a polling question for this, don't we?
Sure. So we'll start out with this one. So if you have a site and you have no information that there's ever been any chemicals used there, do you think you need to worry about vapor intrusion? Give a few more seconds. All right, so about 80% say yes, 20% say no. Hopefully by the end of that, I'll get everybody saying yes. Do one more too, let's see. All right. Are all the regulations for every state the same, or are they different? So yes, if they're all the same, and if you can take one idea from one place and apply it across the country.
Overwhelming.
All right, well, it looks like everybody's getting this one. They are not the same. Many states have different regulations, so we'll talk a little bit about that too. All right, so I like to start talking about vapor intrusion by showing this really, really complicated looking schematic. But it is really nice though, because it shows all the different potential issues you might have with vapor intrusion. And so by the end of this presentation, I hope you can look at it and have a better idea of what we're talking about and be able to look at this and have some understanding. So the things I'll point out for now, and we can talk about this in a little bit, will be at some point you had a release of something into the ground. That was able to seep into the soil, maybe it reached down to the groundwater, and it's seeping into the surrounding buildings. How those buildings are built has an effect on it, including does it have an elevator, how is the HVAC system working, does it have a basement. So we'll get into all of that here in a little bit. So a brief history. So when we first started thinking about vapor intrusion in the 1970s, our main concern was, are the vapors from the nearby gas station that are seeping into my house, is that going to cause my house to explode? Nobody really thought about health risk at that time. It wasn't really until the 80s that people started to look at radon and specifically radon coming from soil and bedrock in the area seeping into your building. In the 90s, people started to understand, well, there's also some other chemicals we might need to look at. So that's when they started looking at some of the more volatile chemicals, and they also included groundwater. In 1993, Massachusetts issues their first vapor intrusion guidance, and that's really what got what Greg and I deal with most days started. In 2000s, larger VI sites started to become a problem. You started to see a lot more of the Superfund sites having vapor intrusion concerns, and you saw screening across the country. So put this little picture here just to have a little comparison of our old gas station pumps versus what they look now, and then everybody's probably got a phone in their pocket compared to one that used to be tethered to the wall. So lots changed since the 70s. So as of 2012, 35 states had issued their own vapor intrusion guidance. This was the best compendium I could find for all the states, but this is definitely out of date because in California, where we're at right now, this has been updated since October 2011. We had updates in 2014 and 2015. So these are constantly being updated. And what I really want to show here is that if you're working in one state or you have a project in one state, you can't necessarily apply the same ideas to a project in another state. Some states are more stringent. California, Massachusetts, they have very, very strict rules. Washington. Then you go to somewhere like Indiana, maybe they're not as conservative. So you have a little bit more room to work. So recently, when you start finding these issues, a lot of times they come up during the due diligence period. So you're looking at buying a property. You want to figure out what's going on. So you do an all-appropriate inquiry search, looking through the reports, trying to figure out, was there any use on the site that might have caused an environmental problem? It wasn't until 2013 that ASTM, who actually provides the guidance for doing these phase 1 reports, that they came out and said, well, you need to start looking at the vapor migration pathways as well. A lot of good consultants before then were aware of vapor intrusion concerns and were advising their clients, but it wasn't something that was a requirement to have a complete report. So after they came out with this new regulation, EPA adopted it as part of their standards for practices of all appropriate inquiries. So if you're doing phase 1 now, this is standard practice to get it taken care of. So when would you expect it? We'll talk a little bit about dry cleaners, we'll talk about some gas stations, we'll talk about some manufacturing facilities, and we'll also talk about some natural environments where this might come up. So dry cleaners are probably one of the most, well, I wouldn't say understood, but recognized contributors to vapor intrusion, just because they're everywhere, and there's been a lot of research showing that there are issues associated with them. So organic solvents actually first started getting used by dry cleaners in 1690, which is quite a long time ago, and I was pretty surprised by that. And it was turpentine that they were using. In the 1900s, they started using gasoline as a solvent to do the close. And now they're using, or since then they used some other chemicals such as carbon tetrachloride, Stoddard solvent, which is another petroleum-based one, turpentine, naphtha. But it wasn't until the 1950s that perchloroethylene, or PCE, also you can maybe have heard of it called tetrachloroethylene or PERC, all mean the same thing. That really started getting used in the 1950s. And PCE is really the main driver at dry cleaners that we see for vapor intrusion concerns. There are rules in place now that PCE get phased out. I believe 2020 is when they hope that most dry cleaners in residential areas stop using PCE. And they have moved on to more green technologies, some greener than others, some are petroleum-based. But PCE is what we think of when we think of dry cleaners. If you had a manufacturing use at your site, that would be another obvious place where if they were using chemicals and those chemicals were able to get released, you might have to start thinking about vapor intrusion at your site. Trichloroethylene is a really big one. We see that a lot in Silicon Valley with some of the chip manufacturing. Other metal processing has also used trichloroethylene. Vinyl chloride is another big one and has a lot of risk issues associated with it. But there are other chemicals such as benzenes and toluenes that can seep into the ground and cause vapor intrusion concerns. Gas stations. This is where a lot of research has gone into looking at what is the contribution of petroleum to vapor intrusion. So when we have a leaking underground storage tank at a gas station, the main things that we're looking for from a vapor intrusion perspective would be benzene and naphthalene. Those have the highest risk drivers of the chemicals for vapor intrusion. There are some other chemicals that people talk about, but benzene and naphthalene are kind of the biggest one. Interestingly, we used to focus a lot more on vapor intrusion at gas stations, but they've actually figured out that natural degradation of the petroleum in the subsurface can naturally break down. So you have bacteria and bugs in the soil that are breaking down this petroleum compounds and really making the petroleum not much of an issue. And Greg will talk a little bit about that as well. Finally, natural sources of volatile chemicals. So methane is actually a very big issue that we see in wetland areas, shoreline areas, anywhere where there's a lot of organic natural material that's allowed to break down and ferment. So in those areas, even if you've never had any industrial use, no chemical use, and you're actually nowhere near a place that had chemical use, you still need to consider, well, could I have a methane problem at my site? So we've now looked at our site, and we know that there might be some sort of chemicals, but where do the chemicals come from, and how do they get into my building? So the first way that they can get into your building is from those chemicals being actually attached to the soil. So we'll call that absorbed to the soil. So they're absorbed on, and they're able to off-gas into your building. If the chemicals get down into your groundwater and you've got a dissolved chemical plume in groundwater that's traveling underneath your site, you might see some off-gassing of vapors coming into your building. And here, just for those who don't know, vadose zone that we talk about, and this might come up a couple times, vadose zone talks about the area above groundwater where the soil isn't necessarily saturated. Soil vapor also is a source, and this is one that commonly gets overlooked. People seem to have an okay understanding that groundwater will typically, as we try to simplify it, say that it travels downhill. But soil vapor doesn't necessarily, it isn't constrained to that. So soil vapor can travel uphill, it can go sideways. So if you've got a lot of soil vapor on your down gradient site, it might actually impact your site even though your soil and groundwater has no issues. So we come back to this kind of complicated schematic, and hopefully you guys can see my mouse here, but I'll try to be very descriptive as well. So we talk about, you have your source here, and it's showing it as being an above ground storage tank. That's what AST stands for. So it leaked into your soil, and you see the chemical here is absorbed onto the soil there. So this chemical is able to off-gas, and that's what these little red lines are showing, is off-gassing out into your building. So if that chemical continues to travel through the soil in this vadose zone area and reach the groundwater, well, then you'll have a dissolved phase plume. And this dissolved phase plume will travel down gradient of the plume. So this is what I was saying, it travels downhill. So all along this plume, you also have off-gassing issues. So you might be a half a mile away, but if the plume is underneath your building still, you still might have a vapor intrusion concern. Finally, it's not very obvious in this picture, but you do see that some of these arrows are going the opposite direction that groundwater is flowing. You see this one's going the opposite direction, these are going the opposite direction. And so this is showing that even if you're not down gradient of a source, you still might have an issue. So how do we know if we have a problem? The first we talked about is due diligence, phase one. So preferably you don't own the property yet. You're looking at buying the property, and you want to do some due diligence looking at the history. So were any of those land uses that I talked about, dry cleaners, manufacturing facilities, is it on a wetland? All of these things are things that you would look at during this period. Also, you'd look at, well, is there any previous sampling? Maybe they didn't do any vapor sampling, but maybe they did some soil or groundwater sampling. And those results might show you that it's something that you need to look into a little bit further. After you do that phase 1, you say, oh, there's some things that I need to look into a little bit further. You do your phase 2. And so this is when you actually go out and do sampling. You collect some soil samples, you collect some groundwater samples, and now on almost every single project that I work on, you collect some soil vapor samples just to know, is there any vapor problems? And then you take that data and you screen it against some sort of conservative screening level. Out here, we use, in California, we have the Department of Toxic Substance Control, and we also have the Water Board. Both of them issue different screening levels. Various states have their own screening level, and the EPA has their own screening level. So we screen against those to try to see if we have any issues. This picture here on the left, I want to point out, so these are what our vapor probes look like. So we usually have some sort of porous tip attached to some 1/4-inch tubing, and depending on how deep we want to go, these are probably sub-slab probes, so we put these right beneath the concrete slab of a building. And then up here we have a metal tip that we'd attach our sampling device to. This is in cross-section, so the top would be the surface, and as you go down, we're getting deeper. This shows kind of how they're constructed. So our typical soil gas probe, we take that tubing, stick it in the ground. We've got some sort of sand or porous material surrounding that probe. We try to then seal it to the surface by putting some bentonite, which is a very thick clay that precludes any sort of water or air from seeping through it. So we put some dried bentonite down, followed by some hydrated bentonite. Sometimes we'll want to look and see shallow concentrations versus deep concentrations. So here we've got a deeper probe, we've got a shallower probe, and we're trying to see, well, how do the concentrations change from as you go from deep to shallow? Finally, this is a sub-slab probe, so maybe you drill through the concrete slab. Beneath most all concrete slabs, you have some sort of gravel that was put down that the concrete was poured on top of. So we drill down into this porous area, into that gravel, and then put a probe down there. And there we can see exactly what are the concentrations beneath the slab. Finally, this is what it looks like at the surface. So here we've got a probe that was installed on the ground. And what we've done is we've taken a Suma canister, which is like a metal container that's under vacuum. We've attached that to the tubing, which is coming out of the ground. And then we place that entire piece of equipment inside a plastic box. And the reason we put it in a plastic box is we add helium around all of our sampling equipment. You can use other chemicals. Alcohol, isopropyl alcohol is often used. There's another chemical called 1,1-DFA. You see that a lot in air duster. But we'll surround our sampling apparatus in this plastic container with these chemicals. And the point of this is that as we sample, we want to understand is any of the ambient air at the surface seeping into our probe and potentially diluting out the sample that we're getting. So if we analyze our sample and we find a whole lot of helium, we'll know that that sample is not necessarily representative of what the conditions are in the subsurface. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Greg. He's going to talk a little bit about those screening levels, and yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Do you have a polling question?
The polling question, oh yeah, we do. Actually, this is a good one. We'll ask it now, and Greg can talk about it. So if you have a vapor intrusion problem, does that mean you have to do remediation at your site? So go ahead and vote and let us know.
Should we have the Jeopardy soundtrack going on right now?
Give it a few more seconds. All right. Well, we got 75% said no, you don't have to do any remediation, and 25% said yes, you do. So we'll let Greg go through this, and we'll figure out what the answer is. All right, with that,
Excellent.
Greg?
Another trick question. Thanks, Dave. This is Greg. I'm going to talk for a few slides before we kick it back to Dave. So Dave mentioned we do site characterization and we collect lots of samples, and then we compare the data to what we call screening levels which the agencies publish, and that's how we decide if the contamination at our site is so high that we need to do something about it, or we're good to go. So the agencies, and we're sitting here in Oakland, and I'm going to focus on DTSC, which Dave mentioned. That's our statewide toxic substances control. Also here, the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board publishes screening levels, and then we also use federal numbers from the U.S. EPA here. So these agencies publish screening levels for soil and air and water. Okay, these are the three media that people are assumed to be exposed to at a site. You use the groundwater as tap water, you roll around and eat the dirt, and you breathe the air. Okay, and so soil gas is not one of those media. Soil gas is not an exposure medium, it's under the ground. Okay, so what we do is the agencies have established safe levels in the air, a risk-based screening level for the air, like inside the building, okay, and then we make some sort of assumption about the transport of those chemicals from the subsurface up into the building. Okay, concentrations are much higher under the ground in the soil gas, okay, and they get diluted during the transport process up and into the building. Okay, so there's something we call an attenuation factor, or an alpha, that relates the concentration in the soil gas beneath the building to the concentration of the chemical in the indoor air of the building. Okay, so if you measure the concentration of the chemical in your soil gas, you could apply this alpha to predict what the concentration would be in the indoor air of an overlying building, and then you say, is that too high or too low relative to my indoor air screening level? Or if you want to go in the reverse direction, you can establish a safe indoor air risk number, apply the alpha, and that way establish a safe risk-based soil gas number. Okay? So the concept here is just the soil gas screening level we use to evaluate our soil gas data and decide if we have a vapor intrusion problem, okay, just has these two components. It has the indoor air number, and it has this alpha, which describes the transport process. So we have very standardized exposure assumptions, and they're very conservative when the agency establishes what is a safe concentration of the chemical in air for you to breathe. We're talking about chronic exposures. If you're a resident, you're camped out in the building almost 24/7 for 26 years. Okay, if it's not a residential site but it's a commercial industrial property, then you assume the same workers are there 8 hours a day for 25 years. Okay, and the threshold or the health impact that we draw the line at is a very, very conservative level. It's a 1 in a million cancer risk. The idea here is if you take all the chemicals at your site and all the media and you calculate the cancer risk, the person who is at that site, you want it to be less than 1 in a million. Okay, that's a very conservative threshold. And that's 1 in a million excess cancer risk just coming from the site. That's on top of your background cancer risk, which I hate to tell you is like 1 in 3 if you're a guy, or like 1 in 4. Okay, so your chance of getting cancer is already at least 250,000 in a million. We're talking about one more on top of that. Okay, that's how clean we like our site to be. Okay, so for any given chemical, in this example we're talking about concentration of benzene in air, the agency sets its screening level at the 1 in a million cancer risk level. If you are exposed to this chemical, benzene, by inhalation for your 26 years or what have you, okay, the screening level is the concentration that gives you that 1 in a million cancer risk. Okay, so this graph, we're looking at a graph here, just a one-dimensional graph of benzene concentration, and it's a log scale. Okay, so the concept I want to talk about on this page is this concept of the risk management range. Okay, and really this applies to the entire site, not just on an individual chemical basis. But you want your site, you want to be less than 1 in a million, which is also 10 to the minus 6. Okay, but you can be up to 10 times higher than that, even 100 times higher than that, and you're in what we call the risk management range, and then the agency would want you to do something. Okay, if you're less than 1 in a million, you can walk away, or you get your NFA, you don't have to do anything. If you're in this risk management range, or the 2 orders of magnitude above that, you should do something. Maybe it's more investigation, maybe something. And then if you're above the risk management range, then you have to take some action. You don't want to be exposing people to chemicals at that level. So hold on one second, Dave. So when we're talking about vapor intrusion, okay, we don't want chemicals to migrate up into the building and give someone a 1 in a million cancer risk, okay? That's the goal. The concentration of benzene I'm showing this green triangle, green diamond, go ahead, Dave, is actually the ambient background concentration, okay? So the urban air we breathe, you're already at almost a 10 to the minus 5 cancer risk from breathing that benzene. Okay, so imagine how are you going to figure out if benzene is seeping into your building from underneath the building at this very low 1 in a million cancer risk level if it's already in the building from ambient background coming in the window 10 times higher than that. Okay, it's a challenge. So this is the exact example of why sometimes you don't want to sample your indoor air to figure out if you've got a vapor intrusion problem, because you're going to find chemicals in your indoor air and then you're going to wonder where they came from. Okay, go ahead, Dave. Okay, so don't go blind looking on these numbers here, but these are, I was talking about the attenuation factor that describes the transport. This is a key thing that is part of the puzzle. And here in California, DTSC has some recommendations. San Francisco Bay Water Board has some recommendations, and the US EPA has some recommendations, and they're all different. So depending if you've got a residential or commercial building, there's a distinction, or it can be in some agencies, how deep the contamination is, and even if it's an existing or a future building, all these factors, you can pick a different alpha to use on your project. Okay, so the take-home message here is just that it's somewhat complicated, and the different agencies have conflicting guidance. Okay, so back to our cartoon. So vapor intrusion can really vary quite a bit, or the possibility for it. It's really heavily dependent on the building itself. And as Dave mentioned, things like, does it have a basement? And how is this HVAC system operating? The HVAC is really key. Okay, we're talking about air seeping into a building from underneath. It really matters if that building is positively pressurized or not, or if it has a stack effect where there's warm air rising up through the building and it's pulling the vapors in from the bottom floor. The building is the most important thing. Other important things, and this is things that affect that alpha, how deep is the contamination beneath the building? What type of soil does that contamination have to migrate through before it reaches the bottom of the building? Tight, wet clays are harder for the chemicals to pass through than a dry sand. And a big thing that Dave mentioned earlier is biodegradation, and that's the microbes just naturally munching away and consuming the contamination. That happens for fuels and benzene, as Dave mentioned, and it does not happen, or not nearly as effectively, for chlorinated solvents. So there's a big difference there, what kind of contamination you have, whether you're going to get the beneficial effect of biodegradation or not. Okay, so Dave mentioned trichloroethene and Silicon Valley, and on the right here there's a map, it's just like a street map. This is down in Mountain View, and I know it's hard to read, but US Highway 101 is passing through, and we've got the Moffett Field, the airstrip up at the top right, in NASA Ames Research Center, and this color pink thing is a plume of groundwater contamination that's about 2.5 miles long. This is a US EPA Superfund site. This is the MEW for Middlefield, Ellis, Wisman. Those are 3 streets down there. So here's a situation where there was a release and it migrated, well, this is for like 3 commingled plumes, but it migrated off-site, to say the least, okay? And there's probably hundreds of buildings sitting on top of this plume, and to the extent to which vapor intrusion is happening in any of those buildings, it really depends on those factors you mentioned, like the buildings themselves. Okay, so we collected our site data and we screened our soil gas data, and we found out we've got some contamination and we have a vapor intrusion problem. So now what? So there's really, in my mind, 2 kind of general options. And the remediation, which is to say, kind of get rid of it, dig it up, landfill it, take it away, make it go away, or you leave it there and you have some sort of engineering solution to protect people from it. And we have these stock internet graphics here. So the pinballs on the teeter-totter represents the trade-off between these two options. And the calculator and the pencil means, you know, is my project going to pencil out? Can I afford to do this? Or which one is more affordable or makes sense for me? I didn't really like the pinball. We have a. Okay, we'll skip that slide.
Oh.
Okay, it's a little missing something, so let's skip this one. Okay, so remediation, which is to say typically dig it up and get rid of it, drive it to the landfill, that's pretty expensive. It's very expensive to landfill dirt, haul it away and landfill it. However, that might be your best option, particularly if the contamination is accessible, like it's not too deep, it hasn't got to the groundwater, it's not underneath existing buildings you want to preserve. You might be able to dig it out. This picture here, the excavator, this is at the MacArthur BART station in Oakland, which they turned into a transit village. And first they had to dig out a plume of gasoline contamination. Okay, so let's say you have an existing building, so you can't dig up the contamination from underneath it. What can you do about that? There's a range of options. We'll just mention a couple of them here. Something very sort of minimalist is what we're showing here on the right. This shiny floor is like a top coating. It's a sealant that was applied to the top of the concrete slab to prevent vapors from coming through the building. Something more intense would be to trench or through your concrete floor and install some a suction point underneath the slab. You would sort of like a sump, but for air. And you install this and some piping under your concrete slab and then pour the slab back over on top of it. And you would basically suck vapors from underneath the building and route them up and vent them so they don't come into the building. Another thing you can do, and I mentioned it before, HVAC operation is really a key thing that determines how well vapors can come into your building. So you can adjust your HVAC operation, potentially. Crank up the HVAC, as we say, and especially if you're positively pressurizing that first level, okay, the vapors won't be able to come in. In fact, air will be flowing downwards through your building slab from your inside the building to underneath it. But this doesn't always work, and you can only crank up the HVAC so much. It's not a permanent fix. And there's a quote here in the bottom which I really like. We redacted the name of the company to protect the guilty, but for at least 2 months, high-tech company employees were exposed to excessive levels of hazardous chemical after workers disabled a critical part of the ventilation system at the company's office. So this is a solution where they had a vapor intrusion problem, and so they decided to crank up the HVAC as a solution. But then, some maintenance guys came in one weekend, and they didn't get the memo, and so they noticed it was running really high, and they turned it down. And then no one noticed that for like a few months. Okay, so now let's say we've got a new building. We're going to build a new building, and we can do whatever we want to design it to withstand vapor intrusion. So a pretty popular thing is people have parking on the ground level. And if you can do what's called podium parking, which is this top picture, basically the air just flows right through there and sweeps out any vapors coming out of the ground, and they never even make it into the building. It completely breaks the pathway. However, inevitably, some part of the building is touching the ground because people got to get up from their cars into the building. So there's like a, elevator and stairs. And so that would be a key chink in the armor where you'd want to armor your building against vapor intrusion. Elevators are kind of notorious because they pump up and down, and they, like a syringe, when they go up, they'll suck the air from beneath the building up the elevator shaft. Underground parking is very popular, and underground parking is ventilated, and that ventilation will sweep out vapors coming from beneath the building just as well as they sweep out car exhaust. You got to be careful if you're running your ventilation off a carbon monoxide sensor and it only comes on when there's CO exhaust. That's not going to work for you if there's other chemicals coming from beneath the building you're worried about. So here we have our sub-slab vapor intrusion mitigation system, which typically consists of a gravel layer, which you have beneath your building slab anyway. but you lay some, before you pour your slab, you lay some vent piping in that gravel layer, and you put a membrane on top of that, and then you put your building slab down. So the membrane and the venting system will block the vapors from coming in, and they'll route them up to the roof line, and you'll vent at the roof. This is relatively simple and common, but it does require ongoing O&M. And it might well require indoor air sampling to convince the agency it's working. Okay, so we're at the end of the talk where we have just a couple random slides here, and then we'll be done. So, you know, we have all these different agencies that we have screening levels from, and they change them all the time. It's like they move the goalposts, which is really fun when your project's almost over and then the goalpost moves. So this little graph at the top here just shows that the 1 in a million cancer risk number for TCE itself has been coming down over the years. And another more interesting thing is the US EPA has recently dramatically decided that trichloroethylene exposures can cause birth defects in your children after exposure to the chemical for just days to weeks. So that's a dramatic departure from this concept of people are living here 26 years, 1 in a million cancer risk, sort of, there's not a lot of sense of urgency there. Now there's this concept where, Dave, can you, there's the next, one more. Okay, here's another one of my graphs. This one is TCE concentration. So commercial industrial land use now, TCE concentration, there's the risk management range and your 1 in a million based screening level, okay? But now we've got this short-term action level that's right in there, and that's like a freak-out level. If you're above that, people are worried about having birth defects, okay? And this is a very, very controversial thing, and just so you know, it's based on rats and mice studies, okay? So it's not like a what do you call it, actual thing. So the point here is just that if you have a TCE site, people are really hot and heavy and worried about pregnant women being exposed at pretty low levels and having serious issues as a result. All right, we're at the end.
Oh, thank you, David and Greg, for a very clear overview of vapor intrusion, and we made that in how many minutes?
45.
45 minutes. So folks on the line, you can start keying in your questions, and we have a few. So, but while we're queuing up our questions, I'd just like to remind people again, please answer the survey you will receive after this webinar. And if you have any questions, follow-up questions that you aren't able to ask David or Greg or CCLR, then please put them in the survey. So our first question is the risk higher if there is a basement opposed to a building on a slab?
This is Greg, and I'll take that one. If the basement is occupied, like you're living in your mom's basement, yeah, that's worse than if you're up on the first floor, no doubt. Is it worse for the first floor? If you've got a basement, I'd say that's probably more of a toss-up, and it would depend on the building and how it's ventilated.
Okay, next question. Why no UST in your schematic? Now, I guess the UST is an issue for some folks and for vapor intrusion, so please.
Yeah, USTs are certainly an issue, and almost more so than above ground storage tanks, because many above ground storage tanks have berms around the edge of them to ensure that if there are any releases, they're captured. So I would say the only reason why is just the schematic we found didn't have it. And I believe that one is from the US EPA, so we'll have to ask them to add in a UST in their next round of figures.
All right. Note to EPA. Next question. What is the preferred sampling method, soil gas or sub-slab?
Well, I would say that it depends on what you know about your project. Typically, we'll start with soil gas sampling first to try to figure out what are the potentials, and then move to sub-slab later once we realize that there is an issue. Because if you're drilling through a slab, you may have some issues with that. Compromising, especially if you have rebar in place that you might jeopardize. So we always try to avoid going in and damaging buildings before we sample. But
I would just add that you know, if you don't have a building yet, you can't do subslab, and you can only sample at depth. But if you've got a building there and you are interested in vapor intrusion into it, the subslab sampling might be the best. It is the closest to the building, so that might be the most representative data, subslab.
So this is a really great question. If the UST source has been removed and cleaned up, do we still have a vapor intrusion issue? The question you have to ask yourself is, when was it determined that it was cleaned up? The rules, as Greg indicated, for a lot of the compounds have really gone down. And we've been seeing this in redevelopments. In the industry, they call them reopeners, where your site was closed and then the regulations changed, and now you have a problem. So it really depends. If you have existing data showing low concentrations, it's probably not a vapor intrusion concern, but you'd have to look at that as a site-by-site basis.
If the leak test fails on the field, what are your options?
All right, great question. So that's one of the benefits of using the helium shroud leak detection approach is you can figure out, determine that you have a leak while you're in the field in real time before you collect that sample and send it to the lab. So if you figure out in the field you have a leak, you can, it's either coming through your sample train connections, so you tighten all your connections and hopefully that solves the problem, or it's your probe has a leak and the helium is actually being pulled down into the probe and you're sampling from there, in which case you might have to abandon your probe and install a new one a few feet away.
All right, we're getting a lot of questions here. Does possible reporting of results impact your choice of sampling, soil gas or subslab?
I would say yes and no. I think we try to collect the best data that will help us understand what's actually going on, and I think it really depends on what your conditions are for the site, where's your contamination, type of exposure. We're in a state where many of the regulatory agencies require that regardless of why you're doing the sampling, if you find a problem, it needs to be reported in many cases. So, you know, in those cases, a lot of times we defer to environmental attorneys to try to make that legal distinction on, do I have to report this? But yes, I'd say it depends on a site-by-site basis.
What kind of ongoing maintenance monitoring systems are in place to ensure that the vapor mitigation continues to operate?
All right, great question. The venting systems, membrane systems are pretty low tech, and unless you have a mechanical blower on your system that's sucking air up, there's really like no moving parts or anything to really maintain. Major exception is when you have like tenant improvements in your building and someone comes in and they trench through the floor slab so they can run utilities from one side to the other, they're going to go right through your membrane and you're going to need to fix that before they pour the building slab back. So that's an important responsibility. Agencies will usually require you to do testing, either sampling the indoor air and testing it for the chemicals, or if your system is designed as a depressurization system, you can demonstrate with pressure monitoring that it's working. The different agencies have different requirements, and this is a big thing to negotiate with your agency because it has a big effect on the tail of your project, but it's not uncommon to do sampling twice a year in different seasons for several years to demonstrate that the system is working. There's a 5-year review. When you leave contamination in place, there's like a 5-year review process. So maybe you could try to get out of it at that point. You could say, hey, I've got 5 years of monitoring data that shows my system's working great. How about I don't have to do this anymore?
Okay, my site received a low threat closure for BTEX in 2014. We want to recommend to our client to spend monies on mitigation design and not generate more non-detect data. Is this a reasonable decision?
I think that really comes down to a risk tolerance decision, and this concept comes up a lot for people. What are you willing to take on as far as risk? And we have some people who will put in vapor mitigation systems beneath their buildings when there's no problems at all, just because they can then tell their tenants that we know for sure that there's no issues. So I think that would be a hard question to answer without really looking at the site-specific issues and really coming up with a good recommendation for you.
Okay, we have a couple more, some more time. So if there are any more questions, we noticed that some folks were not able to download the handout. So we will email that to you directly if you request that in your survey. Oh, a question. Do you deal with condo associations and or apartment building owners, and would they have a different position on mitigation and or even remediation?
Yeah, it does come up from time to time. Hopefully when I've dealt with it from both perspectives, but hopefully when we're dealing with them, they've got a system in place and they don't have issues. And they might need some help in understanding why our system is there and how it's protecting them. The more difficult conversations to have is when you have an apartment that is constructed over a plume and they do have an indoor air issue. And yeah, it definitely comes up, and it's a difficult conversation to have at those times.
Now, another question: how about cities that have vapor intrusion issues over wide areas and buildings that are sitting on these plumes? What are their options, and do they have any recourse with the sources? And follow-up is, what if they don't know what the sources are?
Mm-hmm. Well, I showed a slide earlier of such a plume down in Mountain View. Typically, it's not a secret, and there's an agency that's on the case, and probably for many, many years, and the situation is probably pretty well characterized, and that information is probably available. We have a couple of databases here in California, the DTSC EnviroStore and the Water Board's, what's it called?
GeoTracker.
Thank you, GeoTracker. And it's pretty cool. You know, you go on the map wherever you want, and you see all these dots, and you see you're surrounded by release sites. So there's a lot of information out there. So I don't know exactly kind of what scale you're talking about, but
well, and I'll follow up that some cities will actually require any new construction to have vapor mitigation beneath their buildings. We see that in some of the Silicon Valley cities, and we see it also down in LA where they have significant methane issues, where they're just blanketly telling everybody they've got to put it in regardless of what they have at their site. So that's definitely some of the recourse that cities take, but that obviously can be an uphill battle to be something that is enforced.
Okay, there's a clarification to a question here. The site received a low threat closure for BTEX in. Sorry, we have so many questions we can't. They're bleeding into each other. Okay, here's a clarification. I was trying to say the new building is being designed. I agree with the risk tolerance level of the client. I guess that's clarification. So they agree with the risk tolerance. What was the original question?
If they got a closure, would they need to put a mitigation system beneath? So yeah, I think he was agreeing with us that, yeah, it comes down to the risk tolerance of the client.
Okay, assuming dry cleaners and press shops were clustered in old neighborhoods, is there a CDBG or EPA grant program for revitalizing entire neighborhoods? And I would ask, could you type in what state you are in, because it really varies. I think in California, there are ways of using state programs for area-wide cleanup. It's also possible in states like Washington, but depends in what state you are. And you are in Tennessee. There are, thinking very quickly, on this level, we are thinking of area-wide remediation. Can you go down to the question? I can read it again. For entire neighborhoods, there are area-wide strategies that many communities, cities that have received EPA grants have addressed. So if EPA grants are available in the fall, and we will find out pretty much in the next couple of months to what levels EPA grants are available, that would be a good strategy for addressing area-wide type approaches where you're not sure where the sources are, or if you want a better idea of what the area-wide sources are for vapor intrusion and other sources. And please contact the Tennessee, is it the DEQ in Tennessee? Yes, and also contact NJIT, that's the New Jersey Institute of Technology. Enter your information on the survey and we'll give you the contacts to NJIT.
So this is a good question. So is there a screening level for methane? Concern for sites like poultries or farms that convert to residential use. So the main concern that we have with methane is actually explosion. It used to be, they used to have, some states, I should say, had some levels, and there was a lot of question into should those apply, and really what the regulatory industry has come down to is that the lower explosive limit is the most important part. So we basically will take readings and determine is your building, or are the concentrations in a range that would cause an explosion hazard for your building.
All right, we have 1 more minute. I will take one more, there are more questions, so I think the timing worked out perfectly. Again, thank you so much, David and Greg, for this workshop, for this webinar. And I think we've had very good feedback already from the comment box. So again, thank you. Look out for our next webinars and see you later. Bye.